My name is Sienna Vance, and on October 14th, I got married in a backyard in Ann Arbor with 60 guests, string lights, and 2 empty chairs in the front row where my parents were supposed to be sitting. They told me 6 weeks before the wedding that they couldn't come. My younger sister Kayla's baby shower had been scheduled for the exact same Saturday, and my mother said, with what I now recognize as rehearsed calm, "We have to be there for Kayla. This baby is high risk, you understand, right?" I said I understood. I did not understand. But I said it anyway because that's what I'd been doing my whole life with my parents and Kayla, and I didn't yet know how to do anything else. That was the first shock, not a surprise exactly, since they'd warned me weeks in advance, but a quiet, grinding kind of hurt that sat in my chest through the entire ceremony. The second shock came 4 days later, at 11 at night, when I was finally sitting still long enough to look through the wedding photos my photographer had sent over as a preview. And because grief makes you do strange things, I also opened Kayla's baby shower album, the one she'd posted to Facebook that same Saturday, captioned, "Finally got to celebrate this little girl." 2 hearts. The trees behind my ceremony arch were bare and gold, October in full swing. The trees behind Kayla's shower guests in nearly every photo were full and green. I stared at those 2 albums side by side for almost 20 minutes before I said anything to my husband, Theo, who was already half asleep next to me. I just said, quietly, "Something's wrong with these photos." I had no idea yet how right I was or how far that wrongness actually went. Quick question before I keep going, where are you watching from tonight? And is it fall where you are yet, leaves changing, that kind of thing? I ask because the color of tree leaves is, embarrassingly, the detail that cracked this whole story open, and I still can't look at an orange maple tree without thinking about all of this. I want to be honest about something. For 3 weeks after the wedding, I didn't say anything to anyone about the photos. I told myself I was being petty, that maybe Kayla had just reused old pictures because she hadn't taken many new ones. That maybe I was looking for a reason to be angrier at my parents than I already was, because the alternative, admitting how much their absence had actually hurt me, felt too big to sit with. Here's some background so the rest of this makes sense. I'm 32. Kayla is 28. We grew up in Traverse City, Michigan, and if you'd asked either of us growing up which one of us our parents would drop everything for, we both would have said Kayla without hesitation, and neither of us would have thought that was strange. Kayla had a rough patch in her early 20s, a bad relationship, some financial trouble, a stretch where she moved back home for 8 months. And our mother, Linda, has never fully let go of the fear that Kayla is one bad year away from needing rescuing again. I don't think that makes my mother a villain. I think it makes her a person who's been scared for a long time and never quite figured out how to stop organizing her whole life around that fear. I'm telling you this because I don't want you to think this is a simple story about cartoonishly cruel parents. It isn't. It's a story about a family that had been quietly, structurally unequal for years, and about the exact weekend that inequality turned into something with real financial weight and real paperwork behind it. My grandmother, Vivian Vance, died 13 months before my wedding. That timing matters more than almost anything else in this story. I promise I'll explain why. The thing that finally made me stop wondering privately and start looking properly happened almost by accident. 3 weeks after the wedding, when I was scrolling through Kayla's shower album again, I'd started doing this compulsively, the way you press on a bruise, and I noticed a comment from our Aunt Priya that I'd skimmed past the first time. It said, "So happy this finally happened after all the back and forth on dates. Worth the wait." I read that 4 times. As far as I knew, Kayla's shower had one date and one date only, mine, my wedding date. That was the entire reason my parents gave for not attending. There'd been no back and forth on dates that I'd heard about. I texted Priya directly, trying to sound casual, and asked what she meant by back and forth. She called me instead of texting back, which should have told me something on its own. "Oh, honey, I probably shouldn't have written that," she said. The shower kept getting pushed. First it was supposed to be in August, then it got moved because of some venue issue, and then I heard your mom moved it again more recently. I just meant I was glad it finally landed on a date that worked for everyone. "When was it originally supposed to be?" I asked. "I think the actual party, the one in the photos with everyone there, that was back in September. The 20th maybe, but then your mom said they were doing a smaller, second one closer to your wedding date too, just family, so I figured that's the one you meant." A second shower. one in September with most of the guests and decorations, the one with green trees, and apparently a second, smaller family-only one on my wedding day that Priya herself hadn't even attended. That was the first real crack. Because if there really had been a second, smaller shower on October 14th, there should have been photos of it. There weren't. Kayla's entire album, 60-some photos, all traced back to a single event, the Green Tree one from September. So where had my parents actually been on my wedding day? I didn't ask my parents directly yet. I wasn't ready for that conversation, and honestly, some defensive part of me wanted more than a comment from Aunt Priya before I opened that door. The next piece came from someone I didn't expect, my cousin Des, who works part-time at a coffee shop 2 doors down from Foster and Bain, the law firm that had handled my grandmother's estate. Des and I aren't especially close, but we'd texted a little after the wedding, and at some point, trying to make conversation, he mentioned, completely unprompted, "Hey, random, but I saw your parents' car outside Foster and Bain a few Saturdays back. Isn't that where Grandma Vivian's lawyer is? I thought that place was only open on weekdays." I asked him which Saturday. He checked his phone, scrolling back through some group chat where he'd mentioned it to a friend as an offhand look who I saw downtown comment, and confirmed the date. October 14th. My wedding day. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after that text. My parents hadn't been at a second, smaller baby shower. They'd been at my dead grandmother's estate attorney's office on a Saturday, on the exact day I was getting married 20 minutes away. I didn't understand yet what that meant. But I understood with total certainty that the baby shower story had been a cover for something else, and that whatever that something else was, it had been important enough to skip my wedding for. I need to explain my grandmother's estate here, because none of what comes next makes sense without it. Vivian Vance died 13 months before my wedding at 86 after a short illness. She left an estate that included her house, some modest investments, and the thing everyone in the family actually cared about, a lake cottage on Torch Lake that had been in the family for almost 50 years, appraised at the time of her death at roughly $410,000. Her will named my parents, Linda and Paul, as co-executors and split the estate evenly between Kayla and me once all debts and expenses were settled. Standard enough. But there was one clause I hadn't paid much attention to when the estate lawyer first walked us through it. Over a year earlier, grieving and distracted. The will included a 12-month contestability window, meaning that either beneficiary, meaning Kayla or me, had the right to formally request an independent accounting or challenge any asset valuation within 12 months of the date of death. After that window closed, the distributions and valuations used by the executors would become final and essentially unchallengeable without extraordinary legal grounds. My grandmother died on October 14th, the year before. My wedding, my parents' baby shower excuse, their absence, all of it, fell precisely on the last possible day of that 12-month window. I remember reading that detail on the estate attorney's public filing summary, which I eventually requested as a beneficiary, and feeling something cold move through my whole body. My parents hadn't just happened to be busy on my wedding day. They'd chosen to be at that law office on the one day that mattered most for a decision they didn't want me questioning in time. As a named beneficiary, I had the legal right to request a full copy of the estate accounting, which I did, through a probate attorney named Renata Acaffer that a coworker recommended once I explained, haltingly, what I'd started to piece together. What came back about 2 weeks later was a document called a Distribution Acceleration Request, filed and notarized on October 14th, requesting immediate release of a substantial portion of Kayla's inheritance share ahead of the standard settlement timeline, to be used, according to the attached letter, for the purpose of a home purchase down payment. Given the beneficiary's imminent need, Kayla and her husband Marcus had apparently been in the process of buying a house, a real one, 3 bedrooms, a decent school district. The kind of place you buy when you're about to have a baby and your landlord just told you your lease isn't being renewed. I hadn't known any of this. Kayla hadn't told me they were house hunting. I found out from a probate filing before I found out from my own sister. The acceleration request had released $87,000 to Kayla, drawn against her future share of the estate, on the condition that it would be deducted from her final distribution once the full estate settled. On its own, that wasn't necessarily wrong. Executors can, with proper documentation, release advances against inheritance in cases of genuine need. What made my stomach turn was the timing. Filed on the last day it could be filed without me having a full year's worth of opportunity to review it and object. At an office both my parents visited on the one day they knew, with total certainty, that I would not be checking my phone or asking questions about estate paperwork. But even that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was in the numbers themselves. Renata, my attorney, noticed it before I did, which I'm grateful for because I don't think I would have caught it on my own. The $87,000 advance to Kayla had been calculated as roughly 1/5 of her expected total share, meaning the estate's total value, for purposes of that calculation, had been set at a number lower than what I remembered from the original estate summary a year earlier. Specifically, the Torchlake cottage, by far the estate's largest asset, had been reappraised 3 weeks before my wedding, at $260,000. The original appraisal, done shortly after my grandmother's death 13 months earlier, had put the cottage at $410,000. A $150,000 drop in a lake market that, if anything, had gone up over that same period, not down. Renata pulled comparable sales for the area, 3 cottages within half a mile, sold within the same 18-month window, all in the $380,000 to $440,000 range for comparable lot sizes and square footage. The new appraisal wasn't just aggressive. It was, in her professional opinion, difficult to justify through any standard valuation methodology. The appraiser who'd conducted the second valuation, a man named Gordon Weiss, turned out to have a detail attached to his business filings that mattered enormously. His LLC had done 4 other appraisals for my father's small construction supply business over the previous 6 years, a standing professional relationship, not a random selection off a referral list. A lower total estate value meant Kayla's $87,000 advance represented a much larger share, proportionally, of a shrunken pie. While my eventual share, once the cottage actually sold at its real market value, would be calculated against numbers that had never reflected what the property was actually worth. I decided to talk to Kayla before I said anything to my parents. Partly strategy, I wanted to understand how much she actually knew, but mostly, honestly, because some part of me still needed to believe my sister hadn't fully understood what she was a part of. We met at her apartment, 6 months pregnant, boxes already half-packed for the move. I laid it out as calmly as I could, the September shower, the October appraisal, the acceleration request, the timing. Kayla went very still. I didn't know about any of that, she said. I mean, I knew Mom and Dad were helping us with the down payment. I knew it was coming out of my part of Grandma's estate early, but I didn't know about a second appraisal. I didn't know it was low. I definitely didn't know they scheduled it for your wedding day on purpose. I believed her mostly. I don't think Kayla orchestrated any of this. I think Kayla wanted a house for her baby and trusted our parents to handle the financial mechanics honestly, the same uncritical trust I'd extended them my entire life until 3 weeks earlier. Did you know the shower photos were from September? I asked. Not October 14th? She looked away. Mom told me to post them again, closer to the date so it would match up if anyone asked when it happened. She said it would be easier than explaining a scheduling mess. I didn't think about what that actually meant. I'm sorry, Sienna, I really didn't think about what that actually meant. That was layer 2. My mother hadn't just skipped my wedding and quietly filed paperwork. She'd coached Kayla on how to make the cover story hold up if anyone looked closely. I asked my parents to meet me at Renata's office, not their house, not mine, neutral ground, with documentation on the table instead of just feelings. My mother didn't want to come at first. My father was the one who convinced her to. I laid out the timeline the way Renata had helped me organize it, the September shower reused for October cover, the notarized acceleration request filed on my wedding day, the 12-month contestability window closing that same day, the reappraisal from a man with a standing business relationship with my father, the $150,000 gap between that appraisal and every comparable sale in the area. My mother cried before she said anything. My father spoke first. We didn't think of it as hiding something from you, he said. We thought of it as handling something before it turned into a fight. Kayla needed that money before the baby came. We knew if we waited, if we asked you to sign off on an early distribution, it would turn into a whole thing about fairness, and we didn't have the time he stopped. We didn't have the strength for that fight, so we didn't ask. We just did it. You skipped my wedding to do it, I said. You had Kayla repost old photos so I wouldn't ask questions. You picked an appraiser who does business with Dad. None of that is handling something, that's hiding it. My mother finally spoke. I was scared, Sienna. I've always been scared for Kayla in a way I've never had to be scared for you. You've always been the one who could take care of herself. I know that's not fair to you. I know I've spent 30 years making you prove that over and over, and I'm sorry. But in the moment on that Saturday, all I could think about was getting Kayla into that house before the baby came, and I told myself you'd understand once it was done. I didn't understand. I don't think I fully understand even now. But I could see, watching her say it, that this wasn't calculated cruelty toward me specifically. It was 30 years of unequal fear finally showing its financial math. That didn't mean I was willing to let the numbers stand the way they were. Renata filed a formal petition with the probate court requesting an independent, court-appointed appraisal of the Torch Lake cottage, a full accounting of the estate's administration under my parents' executorship, and a request that the 12-month contestability window be extended given evidence of evaluation conducted through a non-independent appraiser with an undisclosed conflict of interest. This was the part of the story that stopped feeling like a family argument and started feeling like an actual legal process, with actual deadlines, actual filings, actual waiting. The court granted the extension in December, about 6 weeks after we filed, on the basis that Gordon Weiss's undisclosed business relationship with my father represented a material conflict that undermined the reliability of the October appraisal. A court-appointed independent appraiser was assigned in January. That appraiser, a woman named Denise Okonkwo Baird with no connection to anyone in my family, completed her assessment in March. Her number: $402,000. Almost exactly in line with the original appraisal from 13 months earlier, and comfortably within the range of every comparable sale Renata had pulled months before. The gap between the fraudulent appraisal and the real one wasn't a rounding error or a difference in professional opinion. It was $142,000 that had been quietly shaved off my grandmother's estate to make Kayla's advance look proportionally smaller than it actually was, at my direct expense. The probate judge's ruling, delivered in May about 7 months after my wedding, did 3 things. First, it formally removed my parents as sole executors and appointed a neutral third-party fiduciary, a licensed estate administrator named Harold Feng, to oversee the remainder of the estate's settlement, including the eventual sale of the cottage. Second, it recalculated Kayla's $87,000 advance against the corrected estate value, which meant that once the cottage sold, a larger portion would come off her final share than either she or my parents had originally planned for. And correspondingly, my own eventual distribution would reflect the estate's true value rather than the deflated one. Third, and this was the part that actually surprised me, the judge ordered Gordon Weiss's appraisal referred to the state licensing board for review, given the documented conflict of interest and the magnitude of the valuation discrepancy. I don't know, as of the time I'm recording this, what happened to his license. That part isn't really my story to follow anymore. Kayla and Marcus were able to keep the house. That mattered to me, honestly, more than I expected it to. I didn't want my sister's family losing their home over our parents' decisions. I just wanted the numbers to reflect the truth, and I wanted a process that didn't depend entirely on trusting the same 2 people who'd already shown me what they were capable of when they thought I wouldn't look closely. Before I finish this out, if you found out your own parents had picked a specific date for something like this specifically because they knew you'd be too distracted to notice, would you have pushed for a full legal accounting the way I did, or would you have let the money go just to avoid the fallout with your family? I've gone back and forth on this more times than I can count, so tell me honestly where you'd land. I want to be honest about something that doesn't fit neatly into a justice was served ending, because that's not really what this felt like, even after the ruling came through. I got the correct numbers. I got a neutral administrator overseeing what was left of my grandmother's estate. I got an appraiser referred for review. What I didn't get back was my wedding day, the version of it where my parents were sitting in those 2 empty front row chairs instead of sitting in a law office 20 minutes away, timing paperwork around a deadline they didn't want me to notice. My mother and I still talk, but differently than before. She apologized again, more fully, after the ruling, not just for the appraisal, but for 30 years of quietly deciding, without ever saying it out loud, that that I needed less protecting than my sister did. I believe the apology was real. I also believe it came only after a court forced the numbers into the open, and I don't know how to fully separate those two things from each other. My father has said less. I think he's still working through what it means that a business relationship he trusted, a guy he'd used for 4 separate appraisals over the years, turned into something that could have quietly cost his own daughter 6 figures without her ever finding out. If a handful of green trees in a Facebook photo hadn't caught my attention on a random Tuesday night 3 weeks after my wedding. Kayla and I are still figuring out what we are to each other now. She had her daughter Nora in December, a coincidence in names I still find strange given everything, but Kayla picked it long before any of this unraveled, so I try not to read too much into it. She's told me more than once that she wishes she'd asked more questions before agreeing to the accelerated advance. I believe that too. I don't think Kayla set out to take anything from me. I think she was handed a version of events by 2 people she trusted completely, the same way I'd been handed versions of events by them my whole life, and it simply hadn't occurred to her yet that trusting them completely might not be safe. We're building something new now, slower than before, with more questions in it than we used to allow ourselves to ask each other. I went to Nora's baptism in the spring. I brought a gift. I stayed the whole afternoon. It felt for the first time in a long time like an event that was actually what it claimed to be. I keep coming back to those 2 albums, open side by side on my phone that first night, bare gold trees in mine, full green ones in hers. Such a small, almost silly detail to build an entire reckoning on. If Kayla had simply taken new photos on my actual wedding day, or if Aunt Priya hadn't left that one offhand comment, I don't know that any of this would have come to light at all. I might still believe right now, tonight, that my parents chose a baby shower over my wedding for the reason they gave me instead of the real one. I think about how much of family life runs on exactly that kind of quiet, undocumented trust. The assumption that the people who raised you wouldn't build an entire cover story around a legal deadline, wouldn't hand your sister a script for which photos to post and when. Most of the time, that trust is deserved. This time, it wasn't. And the only reason I know that now is because I happened to notice the color of some trees. I don't regret pursuing this the way I did, even with everything it cost in terms of how my family talks to each other now. But if there's a quieter lesson underneath the legal one, it's this. The people who love you unevenly will usually tell on themselves eventually, in some small, forgettable detail they didn't think you'd ever look closely enough to catch. I got lucky that I looked. I don't think everyone does. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and reflection. Any resemblance to real individuals or events is coincidental. Takeaway. The truth rarely announces itself all at once. It usually waits quietly in the small details for someone patient enough to notice.